Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. They offer free checking with industry-leading mobile banking. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. What's going on, Hokie Nation? Conference play for both men's and women's basketball is in full swing as the men look to find their footing while the women come off the heels of arguably their biggest moment inside Castle Coliseum today. All that and a little football top 25 way too early conversation coming up. It's episode 340 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. We record on Tuesday, January 9th, 2024 from our high-tech studios at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, and refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. As always, the first month of subscriptions is free. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. In the fourth chair today, we got Mr. Will Stewart. Across the way, our managing editor, David Cunningham. To my right, lead analyst and columnist, Chris Coleman. Andy is just landing or on a red eye on his way back from a little family vacation, so we will definitely see him shortly. But we got a good crew on set. Nevertheless, we're going to talk some men's and women's basketball, a little bit of football to lead off the show. But it's also a good time to tell you that Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. This episode, though, is also presented by Triumph NIL. Triumph NIL is a unique and experienced sports marketing agency specializing in building custom name, image, and likeness partnerships for student athletes. NIL is working at Virginia Tech, and Triumph NIL is a big reason as to why. Visit triumphnil.com to learn more, subscribe, and support the Hokies in NIL. All right, let's talk a little bit of football, gentlemen. Not a whole lot to discuss here, but it is that day after the national championship game. Obviously, Michigan took down Washington yesterday in Houston to be national champions for the first time since 1997. And with that, the next morning, and honestly, moments after that game ends, comes your way too early top 25s across the country. And for the first time in what feels like a minute, the Hokies are back in that conversation. So we're going to kind of go list by list here. But first, I want to start out by asking you guys your season wrap-up thoughts on Hokies football in year number 2 under Brent Pry. We'll start with Chris.
I think they're in a good spot. I think the way they played down the stretch, the way they played after the Marshall game, they've got a ways to go as far as when they go against, like a really good defense with really good disciplined players, like your NC States, your Louisvilles, your Florida States. Certainly they have a ways to go up front there, I think. But as far as what they do against everybody else, I think they've made huge strides. The schedule is favorable for next season, so I think people have a right to be excited about the prospects of the team next year.
When Brent Pry was hired, the cupboard was pretty bare at some spots, and that's not necessarily a shot at the previous regime, but there were some holes, and I think you saw it across the board. The Tech lacked talent at a lot of places. Through 2 years, Virginia Tech is obviously making steady progress. I think the Hokies are on a good upward trajectory. I think the future is positive. Tech has done very well in the portal. Tech has done very well recruiting the Commonwealth again. I think the thing that will separate Tech from the thing that determines Tech's ceiling, I think, is up front, like Chris said. I think the thing that stood out to me when watching the college football playoff games, you look back at that Alabama-Michigan game, everything's won in the trenches. And I think that's, at least on the offensive side of the ball, is where the Hokies' weakness, if there is one, is. If how they improve in that area will determine their ceiling. But they got everybody back. Kyron Drones is back. Bashal Tutin's back. The receivers are back. Dorian Strong's back. Anton Powell-Ryland's back. There's a lot of positive energy around the program. Everybody wants to be there. The Military Bowl is kind of just a cherry on top. So a lot of positive energy going forward. I think they're in a good place. They've still got, on both the offensive and defensive line, I think. Obviously, they filled some holes on the defensive line, but I think, if they can they've got Sam Brumfield in if they can kind of figure out who can play alongside him and play alongside him consistently, and then figure out the safety spot. I mean, the holes that are concerning have kind of, last season there was a bunch of them. This season there are very, very few. So I think they're continuing to make progress, which is a good sign.
Will, how you feeling after the season comes to a close here?
The record says 7-6, but the eye test and the heart say 9-4.
All right.
That was a 9-4 football team at the end of the year. If they can go back and play Purdue and Marshall again, they would win those games. So those of us that follow them closely, we know that that's what we're looking at. I don't think the rest of the country really knows it, even though you're going to go through some of the early top 25s. I think a lot of that, unfortunately, is driven by the bowl win, and the way Tech looked in the bowl, which I think is silly. But David's correct. They're doing a good job building the roster. The depth is what they will continue to work on in coming years. And next year's schedule is very comparable to this year's schedule in terms of strength. Yes, I know teams change a lot during the offseason with the portal. One last thing to say about that is that lost my train of thought, so back to you.
All right. Sounds good. Well, we want to go list by list here a little bit. We picked some of our most reputable lists here. So CBS Sports left Virginia Tech out of their top 25. The Athletic had them just missing it. They were receiving votes.
And
they didn't.
this is early top 25 for next year.
Yes, they literally call it the way too early. All of them are saying the way too early top 25. Again, these are published moments after the national championship game. So the Athletic had Tech just out. Yahoo Sports had Tech left out. ESPN left Virginia Tech out. USA Today had the Hokies ranked at 25th in the country. Pro Football Focus left Virginia Tech out. 247 Sports had them third in receiving votes, so just outside of the top 25. And On3 had them left out. Not everybody had, pretty much every time that Tech was left out, there was no receiving votes category or just missed or whatever they want to call it. They just did a top 25. So you don't know how close Tech could have been. But generally, these lists are pretty much the same. Teams in Tech's echelon, so to speak, were, Kansas State, SMU was around there. Florida State was floating in the 18 to 23 range. Miami, surprising to see. Will made a face, see Florida State that low maybe. So that's kind of what you're looking at as far as competition. Bleacher Report left Virginia Tech out as well. That was one I had forgotten to mention. But the gist seems to be that Tech's kind of a fringe top 25 team here. Do you guys see Virginia Tech as a top 25 team heading into next season?
I think they're a team that has a chance to be. There's probably 15 to 30 teams that could say the same, that are on that fringe list, that if they use the portal to fill out their rosters correctly, if they stay healthy, if the bounces go their way and what have you. But yes, Virginia Tech will have that opportunity, I think. It does not surprise me that they're probably will not be a preseason top 25 team. But, I just know about Virginia Tech. That's the thing. I don't know what other teams have done in the transfer portal. It used to be easy. Like, you just look at their rosters and see how many seniors they have and make your projections from there. But now it's like, well, how many of those seniors actually have an extra year and are coming back? And what have they done in the portal? There's a lot more to study these days. So I don't know as much about other teams. Like, has Florida State got a portal quarterback?
Yeah, DJ
Uyunglele.
Right.
That's
DJU.
Right. That's right. Wow. Coming back to the ACC. Huh?
Yeah.
But like, is he as good as Jordan Travis? No, in my opinion. I think he's got a lot of natural arm talent. But Jordan Travis was a great college quarterback. So I think Florida State downgrades slightly there. So the 18 to 23 range seems about right. But, there's so many teams out there that I just don't know enough about because the rosters are so fluid these days. But I do think Virginia Tech deserves mention in that list, and we've talked about it since before the bowl game. That, whatever happened to the bowl game next year sets up as a chance to be a very successful season. Like Will said, Virginia Tech could have won 2 more games this year. Now, if they'd won those 2 regular season games, they would have been in a different bowl game against a better opponent, most likely. So you don't know whether they would have won a 9th game or not. So the way I look at it, Virginia Tech is an 8-win regular season team this year, 8-4, because I think if they played those 2 games at the beginning all over again, they'd win them. Whether they would have won a 9th in a bowl game, we don't know. I look at next year's schedule, and I'm thinking like I'll be disappointed if they don't go better, at least 8-4 again. Or again, they didn't officially do it this past year, but they could. I'll be disappointed like if they did worse than that. I would be disappointed like if they don't go 9-3, because I feel like with so many guys coming back, and I think you filled most of your holes adequately through the portal, then the guys who were coming back should improve, so you've got Clemson at home, which is a winnable game.
It is, yeah.
For sure.
You're at Miami. I mean, Miami could be 10-2, or they could be 5-7. But we don't know what Miami is going to show up on a year-to-year basis, or even a week-to-week basis.
And the crowd at Miami doesn't scare you.
Right, exactly. Rutgers. I will throw Rutgers in there because their defense and their running game are beastly. And I'm guessing they'll go in the portal and get another quarterback if they haven't already.
Luckily, you get him at
They
Lane.
have not. Yeah. Fortunately, you get them at Lane, and you're going to be running a different offensive system than you were last year when you played them. I think all those are fair rankings. And for me, I'm sitting here thinking, 9-3, 10-2, something like that. I think it's legitimately possible.
Just for Nick, by the way, Big Game Boomer had him at number 22, which was the highest ranked that the Hokies were. That is what started this whole conversation in our big group chat. David, what you got?
Yeah, I think Tech is kind of right there in that conversation, but I think Tech still has a lot to prove. Like, I think beating a Tulane team, beating 11-win Tulane team, yes, it's good, but Tulane also was missing a bunch of guys. And what stands out to me is I think back to some of those big games against Florida State and Louisville this year. The teams that were very good, mm-hmm. Tech was outmatched, clearly. Now, Tech beat the teams in, as we described, it's echelon, right? Tech beat the Boston Colleges, the Virginias, knocked them out of the park, frankly.
Yeah.
I think there's still some ways to go. I think this is a team that could probably win 8 games next year. But, and probably, I could totally see Tech starting 2-0, 3-0 and jumping into the bottom of the top 25. I think that's very, very possible. You look back to last season, Tech obviously started 1-4, and I think getting off to a good start is what really matters. The non-conference slate isn't too scary. I mean, it's Rutgers, Marshall, ODU, and Vanderbilt.
Marshall again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Marshall comes to Blacksburg. Yeah. Rutgers is in Blacksburg. Tech goes to Vanderbilt, and then Tech goes to Norfolk.
Is Rasheen Ali coming back?
I don't know.
I
have been covering basketball.
Well, I'm not as worried about this year because Tech has a Mike linebacker now.
Yeah, but I think the biggest thing is like Chris said, the schedule sets up nicely, and this is a team that has a lot of potential. I still think that there's some ways to go. I think the guys that they brought in, it really helps. They've got to develop the guys that are already in the program, and that means Tech needs to figure out who's going to play will linebacker. If Keontae Jenkins doesn't come back, who's going to back up Caleb Woodson at star? Or is somebody else going to slide over there? Who is that the offensive line you feel confident in? And how good is that group? How cohesive is that group? Those will determine how good Tech can be in that top 25. I think Tech could be a top 25 team, very much so, because a lot of the pieces are there. I mean, when you return as much as Tech is returning, you're going to be in every conversation. But for me, there's still some questions that I go, okay, like, yes, I expect Tech to handle the teams it should handle, but when you face a team that has more talent than you in Clemson, that is going to be one of the bigger tests. When you face a team like Miami that probably has more talent, those are going to be the opportunities that are going to decide everything. But yeah, a lot of positivity around it. To think about, Brent Pry took over in December 2021, and Virginia Tech is now in the top 25 conversation, a little after 2 years after he took the job. So pretty impressive, the job that he and the staff have done.
Definitely some serious momentum in the football program. Will, wanted to get your thoughts on your way too early projections for Tech football next season.
Well, it's interesting because the thing that left my mind a moment ago is relevant to this discussion. It's all about the injuries. Who's going to get hurt between now and then? And the one thing talking about the schedule, and Hokie fans are going to get pissed off at me for saying this, Virginia Tech goes to Syracuse next year. Mark it down as an L until it's proven otherwise. The Hokies are 2-8 in the Carrier Dome, which we will always call it the Carrier Dome.
You're just trying to get me in trouble over here.
No, you just sit there and listen. Tech is 2-8. They won in 1986, and they won up there when they had a guy named Michael Vick at quarterback. Otherwise, they have not proven they can win up there.
And even that Vic game was a struggle.
I know. Vic had to score a big long touchdown run at the end, and so. Again, this is going to piss you off, but you got to, if you want to go 9-3, you got to win 9 of the other 11. So that is my hot take to make Hokie fans mad.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, obviously that's a Syracuse team with a brand new coach, but those are the games that Virginia Tech is going to have to win, right? How many road games did Virginia Tech win in the ACC this year? 2, and they were the final 2: Boston College and Virginia. Like, this was a team that halfway through the season had not yet. That had only won on the road once before Boston College in Brent Pry's entire tenure. Yeah. There are there's a lot of positivity, but this is also a team that didn't really hit its stride until the beginning of November. And I'm very curious to kind of see how everything kind of pans out in the spring if the Hokies can stay healthy, like Will said. Because they're going to be in situations like that where they're probably going to be favored when they go up to the Carrier Dome, when they go up to Syracuse. And can they pull it out? Can you get it done on the road? And, if they can, then they probably have the makings of a top 25 team.
That will be a fun one. We don't know when exactly on the schedule that'll be, but that'll be a fun one because for the first time, probably since the game Will's talking about, it's going to be the most talent a Syracuse roster has had since then as well.
Low bar.
Yeah, I mean, the bar is incredibly low.
January 31st is when the ACC football schedule comes out. So mark that down. That's
big.
That was officially announced by the conference when it announced the new scheduling model back in the fall.
Speaking of schedule, we're right on pace here, gentlemen. So good job, everybody. A little stat time with Scott Glesner. We'll send it over to Will.
First of all, an interesting thing from the message boards, and let me pull this up on my phone so I get it correct. Somebody included a picture of the Parade All-American teams from 1995. Now, you youngins don't know what a Parade All-American team is. Back when newspapers ruled and there was no internet, there was an insert in the Sunday paper called Parade Magazine. And they were typically an entertainment and culture insert. They weren't about sports. But once a year, they would do a Parade High School All-Americans. And it was a fairly small team, probably about maybe 50 guys total from high schools all over the country. And for some reason, the Parade All-American, even though Parade didn't cover sports, it was kind of revered to be a Parade All-American. And let me read you the quarterbacks from the 1995 Parade All-American team. Some of them, I don't want to hang up on any of them because the last one I'm going to mention is the most interesting. Chris Redmond, Dan Kendra, I recognize that, went to Florida State. Bobby Sablehouse, never heard of him. Quincy Woods, Brock Heward, we all recognize that name.
Brock Heward, yeah.
Jason Peace, Brian Messer, and a guy named Justin Fuente. He was one of 8 Parade All-American quarterbacks in 1995.
Wow.
So that is not a stat time with Scott Glesner. So let's transition to that. I think the last time we did stat time with Scott Glesner, I was a little bit guilty of rushing through it. Okay. So I'll slow down a little bit this time in case you guys have any input on it. I think this is the most interesting thing he sent. The Military Bowl win against Tulane was the 4th straight time Virginia Tech has won a bowl game when their first drive ended in a fumble. So the next time Tech's in a bowl game, the first drive ends in a fumble, say to yourself, yes!
When was the last time? Was it the Rutgers?
So he listed them.
Russell Athletic Bowl?
2002 San Francisco Bowl versus Air Force. Mm-hmm. 2012 Russell Athletic Bowl versus Rutgers, and the 2016 Belk Bowl. Tech fumbled on the first possession of that.
Tech fumbled on the first possession against Rutgers this regular season too. Did not. And the same as the Athletic
It's
Bowl.
got to be a bowl game.
Yeah.
And last year when Tech was struggling in 2022, we spent a lot of time talking about how they didn't score over 30 points in a single game. Virginia Tech has scored over 40 points in 3 of their last 40 points in 3 of their last 4 games. The last time Virginia Tech had a stretch like that was when they did it 4 straight times in 2010. Wow. So that was
That was Tyrod and Danny Cole and David
Jared
Wilson
Boykin.
and Jared Boy. That was they had playmakers all over.
You
the
guys
field.
remember last year when they didn't score 30? Quite a turnaround.
Hopefully, I think I've mostly blocked that out from my brain right now. Hopefully, it completely goes away soon enough. Hopefully, that like one day we'll look back and say that was just a blip on the radar.
Yeah.
I think the stat was that's the first time Tech had failed to score 30 points in a game since either 1977 or 1979. So that was pretty bad. Speaking of the Russell Athletic Bowl, the 252 yards by Tulane is the lowest figure by a Virginia Tech Bowl opponent since 196 yards by Rutgers in the 2012 Russell Athletic Bowl. And I just have to laugh. That was, if you remember the Russell Athletic Bowl afterwards, everybody was like, my eyes, my eyes.
A lot of puns.
What was the final score of that game?
13 to
13 to 10.
Yeah.
Rutgers was winning 10-0 going into the fourth quarter.
Wow.
Tech rallied. Big one.
Wow.
Yeah.
That game was nasty.
It was horrible.
Right.
I think it was the worst game I've ever watched.
Really?
Yeah. I would watch the Wake Forest game over the Russell Athletic Bowl. More things. I feel like Tech moved the ball better, generally speaking, in the Wake Forest game.
Between the
it was a
20s.
little more entertaining, I thought.
Between the 20s.
The two penalties by Tulane is the lowest by a Virginia Tech Bowl opponent on record, so that's pretty interesting. Wow. Here's another one. Virginia Tech has scored at least 6 points in every quarter of every military bowl they've played in. There have been 3 military bowls, and Tech scores in every quarter.
Wow.
Virginia Tech has scored a touchdown in 10 of those 12 quarters in the military bowl. That is interesting.
That's impressive, actually.
Yeah. One last one from Scott, and this is random. It's not bowl related. Virginia Tech has at one time scored 34 or more points in every quarter on record, quarters 1 through 4. Most ever scored in a quarter was 35 points against Arkansas State in 2002.
I remember that game.
Yeah. What do you remember about that game?
Arkansas State actually had a player from Roanoke. He was like a wide receiver or a running back, I think.
Something like
I
that.
forget his last name. It was a unique last name. But like he knew Lee Suggs, of course, because they were from Roanoke.
Right.
I just remember what was it, like 62-7 final?
Something like that.
They hit a deep bomb over like a freshman DB at the end of the game. to score.
Kerry Wade for some reason.
It was over Kerry Wade.
Why do I remember that?
I don't know. I don't remember what I did yesterday. What was the score of the game?
I know. Okay, so it's 63-7.
Yeah.
Was it James Hickenbotham?
Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was it.
Hickenbotham.
That's it.
It was.
He had 2 catches for 39 yards.
Oh. I just remember that as D'Angelo Hall himself almost had 35 points in the first quarter. Yeah. Was that the game where he ran two?
No,
he ran two.
That was Syracuse in 2003.
Right.
D'Angelo Hall had a 69-yard. He had an interception return. He had a punt return and an interception return in the first quarter.
First quarter.
So he outscored them by himself.
So it was a 69-yard punt return from D'Angelo Hall, a 32-yard rush from Lee Suggs, a 49-yard interception return from D'Angelo Hall, a 19-yard reception from Jeff King from Grant Knoll, and a Kevin Jones 19-yard rush. Tech led 35-0 after the first quarter, scored 3 times in the second. Brian Randall, 12-yard rush. Jason Lallis, 59-yard fumble return. Mike Emo, 19-yard pass from Brian Randall. And then, with 11 minutes to go, Arkansas State scored a 73-yard touchdown pass. And then Brian Randall had a 5-yard rush to close out the game.
Yeah, so basically they blew them out in the first half and then
Put in the backups.
Put in the backups and rested the starters for the second half because they had LSU next week.
And that game is also one of the few games that dog Will Hunt played in.
Yeah.
All right, one last stat from Scott, and this is a downer. Virginia Tech has never allowed more than 30 points in a quarter. 28 points is the most they've ever allowed in a quarter. Tell me when the last time Virginia Tech allowed 28 points in a quarter was.
Is it within the last decade?
A quarter.
Justin Fuente's coaching career at Tech turned around for the worse.
Was it
day.
Duke? Was it? No, Syracuse. Because
ODU in 2018.
They did it in a quarter? Wow.
Yeah, they scored 28 points in the
Syracuse scored a ton in the fourth that game, and that was when they chanted Fire Fuente. That's why that was my
Yeah,
guess.
I think it's not on the list. The point UCLA in 2013 in that Sun Bowl.
Yeah.
Alabama scored 28 points in 2 different quarters in 1973. And Duke in 1950. But yeah, so Alabama scored 28 points in the second and 28 points in the third, 56 points in 2 quarters. All right. Thank you, Scott.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Talk a little bit of men's basketball here. Flip the script a little bit. Safe to say, you hate to do it, but things not going so well for the Hokies right now. Back-to-back losses on the road in ACC play to Wake Forest and Florida State. Fellas, I turn it over to Chris and David. What's going on? What's the issue here?
It's a combination of a lot of things.
It's a lot of things. I think what has led to this point is it's a few different things, but mainly that one recruiting class, the Mike Jones recruiting class of what I call it. 50% of those players are gone, which is common these days, but it was the 2 most talented players of that class. 2 players who I believe would be starting right for Virginia Tech.
And which you mean was the 2022 class
Right, yeah,
Rodney Rice, who's gone, Darren Buchanan, who's gone.
And playing well for GW.
And then
He just scored
MJ
38 points the other night.
Yeah, triple overtime.
MJ Collins,
fair.
he was a A10 Rookie of the Week.
Right.
And MJ Collins and Patrick Wessler are that 4-person class. Is
Right.
what Chris is talking about.
Right. And so I think if you put Buchanan in there at the 4, and obviously you put Rice in there at guard, and I think you've got a better basketball team. I think the performance, like in that third guard or wing spot, whatever you want to call it, Tech actually did get pretty good production from Nickel and MJ Collins. They combined for 19 points the other day, but that's not normal for them to combine for that
But look
many
at the
points.
front court scoring.
Oh, I know. That was going to be my next point. You know, it was an off game for Lynn Kidd. I mean, Florida State is so big, but he's been a good, productive player for Tech. But at least he came up with 8 rebounds and 3 assists, right? Even though he didn't have a good scoring game. But Tech hasn't gotten production from the 4 spot all season. You never expected to replace the assists of Justin Mutz. He led the team in assists 2 years in a row. But you expected to replace some of his scoring, but you've got Mekhi Long and Robbie Barron combining for 9 points and 6 rebounds. And they even played together some against Florida State, so that they played a total of 44 minutes. And you know, you just need more. Those are 2 redshirt seniors, or 5th-year seniors because of COVID.
Yeah, they're grad students.
Like you need more production from that spot, and doesn't necessarily mean that either one of those guys is a bad player. It just means that, like, ideally for Virginia Tech, I think both of them at this level, at the ACC level, are 12 to 15 minute a game guys. Behind a starter.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, Robbie Barron he started for Northwestern.
Yeah, but
in the Big Ten.
Correct, but by the end of his career, he was on the bench.
Yeah,
He was only playing about 10 minutes a game by the end of his career.
I think they're probably like 14 to 18 minute guy. The problem is that Tech does not have consistent contributions from everywhere. Now, Sean Padula, I thought, had a much better game. He's been injured. He got back healthy. Hunter Couture had a great game. When you're scoring in the backcourt like Tech was, like Tyler Nickel and MJ Collins, great. The thing that stood out to me was 9 assists on 25 baskets. The ball didn't move. And now part of that is the way Florida State defends. Florida State's length makes it difficult to move the ball. So Tech's forced the openings are when you drive. And that's what Tech did a lot more of. The problem is that's not Tech basketball. Tech does not usually have success off of driving. Tech has success off of passing the ball around, moving. Yeah, the occasional drive and kick, but a lot of times it was a Tech driving to the rim and trying to put up a shot. And then I look at the front court, and like you said, Chris, Tyler Nickel and MJ Collins scoring 19 points, that's pretty impressive. They don't usually score together like that. But at the same time, Tech got 10 total points from the front court. That's between Lynn Kidd, Mekhi Long, Robbie Barron, and Elijah Poteet. And I think the problem is, the biggest problem is that this team does not have consistent contributions from anybody outside of Hunter Couture and Sean Padula. And even that is like you look at Wake Forest, like Wake Forest took away Hunter Couture for the most part, and Sean Padula was playing hurt. Like, yes, Lynn Kidd scored the ball pretty well, but they're in all of Mike Young's teams. You even look back at that first team, there was somebody. They had multiple guys that could kind of drive and get a bucket if needed. They could like they could kind of will you to a bucket a little bit. I think about Landers Nolly. Like, Tech fans don't like Landers Nolly because he left and he went to a bunch of different schools and whatnot. But that first year, that team was not very good. But he and Tyrese Radford were able to kind of will Tech to get buckets. And then you go to the Keve Luma, Justin Mutz era, where you've got Naheem Aline and you've got Hunter Couture and you got Wabisa Beatty. Well, and then you've got Storm Murphy and Mutz and Aluma. And like Justin Mutz, Kevin Luma, those guys were always creating. You always knew that, like, if you threw it down in the post, you could get a bucket from Justin Mutz and Keve Luma. It was, they weren't going to score every time, but they were going to score a lot of the time. And then you had Grant Basile last year. And I thought, Basile was good. He wasn't necessarily great on the defensive, but he improved as the season went along. And he was a terrific scorer. He's gone. Justin Mutz is gone. And I think Tech's defense has been hit or miss, but the defensive efficiency is rated higher than the offensive efficiency is right now. But what worries me is that there is not a consistent guy on the floor outside of Hunter Couture that is scoring at a high rate. Like Sean Padula is doing it, but he had a few games here or there. But if you only have two guys and they're both guards that can score, like there are times where Tech throws the ball down low, and it's a turnover, or Lynn Kidd gets double teamed. Like Tech does not have enough consistency across the board, and that's a combination of not retaining guys that come and play for you originally, and sure, there are a bunch of different reasons why those guys are no longer there, ranging from the guys that left 2 or 3 years ago, the Jalen Cones, the John Ogiacos, to the Darius Maddoxes, the Rodney Rices, the Darren Buchanans. There are a lot of guys who have come and left, and they've all had their reasons, but the amount of turnover, I think, hurts Tech, because Tech's going to have to lose both of its fours next year. Mekhi Long and Robbie Barron are going to be gone next year too. It's just this cycle, and Mike Young has, like, not getting Grant Basile back, I think, really hurt, because they had Justin Mutz at that spot for so long. But now Tech's kind of just like not getting any consistent contributions from that spot in terms of scoring. Mekhi Long is a pretty good rebounder, and he and Robbie Barron are both pretty good defenders. But I look at Virginia Tech, and then I look at other ACC teams, and I covered the Wake Forest game in person. I even look at Florida State, and I think Florida State's in a similar boat, not as good, but I look at Wake Forest and what Steve Forbes has been able to do with that roster. Doesn't matter what 5 players, like of that 8 or 9 man rotation, doesn't matter what 5 players you put on the floor. Every person is a threat to score. And you just don't feel that way with Virginia Tech. And then the issues kind of snowball a little bit from there.
This team, it's not as dynamic out of the post. I wrote an Inside the Numbers article last year, and I went over Padula's assist numbers. It's not about Padula. It's what it says about everybody else. Last year Padula was second on the team in assists, and even the year before that, Storm Murphy was second on the team in assists. Well, now Padula is first by a wide margin. It's not even close. Mm-hmm. So Tech isn't getting the passing out of the 4 and 5 spots as they were in the past. You don't necessarily expect that to happen every year, though.
Mutz was such a great assist guy.
It was so unique. So when you don't have that type of stuff anymore, you have to make up for it in other ways. And Tech is just unable to do it. They're not physically tough enough at times. That one stretch in this game. Now, Florida State, Tech actually outscored Florida State 11-9 in second chance points. I'm not even sure that's an accurate stat. Do they count free throws? Because Tech fouled them a bunch after they grabbed offensive rebounds. There was like a stretch of like 4 straight possessions where Florida State was just offensive rebound.
Yeah, it was 3 straight possessions, and Florida State had 8 offensive rebounds.
Right. And they had 11 for the game. And it was in that stretch when they made their run and came back, and they just out-toughed Tech. So that's an issue as well, where it's just not a very physical team. So they're not as skilled as they were last year, and they're also not as physical as they were the last few years. That's a recipe for not being as good. Now, that's what we're saying right now on January the 9th. We all know, as Tech fans, things can change over the course of a season, and you can look and say, and a player who's not performing well, maybe it's more he's getting used to the system than anything else. But it's got to start soon. It's got to start soon, because you can't, if you want to make the NCAA tournament. Now this, I don't even know why we're not going to have that conversation anymore after another week or so.
Fair.
Because it just doesn't have the look of an NCAA tournament.
And this, it'd be one thing if Tech was playing Louisville every week, but Tech's not playing Louisville every week.
Yeah.
I mean, and you could even say like Notre Dame. Notre Dame looks a lot better than the record. And I at the beginning of the year, I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting to see. There's probably going to be a gap between the teams at the top and the teams at the bottom of the ACC. I mean, yeah, some of the teams at the bottom aren't as good, but Georgia Tech beat Duke. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame has picked up a big win or two. Like those teams aren't as far down anymore. And right now, Tech's probably like 9th or 10th. Yeah. And in comes Clemson, in comes Miami, then you go to UVA, then you go to NC State.
So let's bring it there. That's our next four. If you're looking at Virginia Tech's upcoming schedule, you host number 21 Clemson, you host Miami, then like you mentioned, at UVA in Charlottesville, and then you're down in Raleigh against NC State. How do you turn things around? Because that's a gauntlet right there. That's four of the upper echelon teams in the league at this moment.
You have to be physical.
Yeah.
You have to be mentally physical, because Clemson always comes in and uses its physicality. That is the staple of Brad Brownell's team. They come in and they're physical. You've gotta have that aspect of you. Miami's the athletic team. Miami's going to and then you go to UVA and you're gonna have to be disciplined. And that's a place Tech hasn't won since Kerry Blackshear hit that shot, which feels like a decade ago at this point. And then you got NC State, an NC State team who is kind of a combination of athletic and physical. And I think NC State just blew out UVA by 20 or something like that over the weekend. I mean, it was a 20-point game. Like,
UVA's the most winnable game in that stretch.
And UVA has the best defense.
Correct.
In that stretch. And like, I think that Tech UVA game might be like first to 40. Not gonna lie. But you've got to move the ball. You've got to move the ball, and you have to defend as a team. And I think that's what Tech struggled at right now, moving the ball. I think, like Chris said, Sean Badula kind of has to do some of the stuff he has been doing because there aren't many other options.
He has to do too much. Yes. If he doesn't do too much this year, I thought he did too much at times last year when Tech had a bunch of scoring and passing options. This year, he has to do too much. Otherwise, Tech's going to struggle to score.
Yeah. And it's going to come down to every game getting Hunter Couture going. I look back at that Wake Forest game where Hunter Couture only had a 3 or 2, and it was a 20-point game.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't close because nothing went right.
I was mad that they wasted a 5 of 6 3-point performance from Hunter Couture in that game. He went 5 of 6. That guy just goes off in that arena.
Yeah, he does.
Talking about Florida State.
Yeah. Florida State.
Anytime he even steps in the state of Florida, he goes off.
He seems to. Now, if you told me this before the game, the Tech would go 11 of 23 from 3-point range, that they would out-rebound Florida State, they would hold Florida State to 4 fast break points. I would have said, yeah, Tech's going to win the game.
Yeah.
But this team is still an old Seth Greenberg line that he would break out a lot of times whenever Tech lost a game. He's like, we weren't strong enough with the ball. We weren't strong with the ball.
Look at the
Tech
turnover
is not
numbers.
strong with the ball. This is not a team that is strong with the ball. 16 turnovers, 17 points off turnovers for Florida State, and that was the difference. I mean, Tech struggles when athletic teams get up in their face. And
what were the second chance points? Did you go over that?
Technically, Tech won that battle 11-9, but I'm not sure.
It didn't feel that way.
Well, that was that one stretch.
But that's the thing.
And that was,
they only had 3 baskets off of that. They just had a lot of rebounds.
Right. And the thing, because that I was sitting there thinking the whole game, okay, if I write something about this game or on the podcast next week or whatever, I'm going to say how I was really impressed that Virginia Tech did the things they needed to do to beat Florida State. They only allowed 4 fast break points because they were so good on
Transition
defense. And they just did a lot of little things well. And then that point, it just started breaking down. They started allowing offensive rebounds and got kind of out physicaled.
I don't remember the exact number, but during that stretch, Florida State outshot Tech something like 11-2.
Yeah,
you know, and
yeah. And I think most of those were free throws, Chris. It was a basket and a free throw,
yes.
a basket and a free. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 16 turnovers is not the look of a Mike Young team. Tech had 12 turnovers in the first half against Wake Forest. And teams are like, UVA won't do it because it's UVA. But I'm sure Brad Brownell and Jim Larinaga are sitting there watching the film, licking their chops at Tech going, Tech can't handle the ball. Like Tech, the number of mental mistakes I've seen Tech make. It's like, I think back to the Wake Forest game, like guys stepping out of bounds, Tech not being able to inbound the ball. Like, that's like fundamental stuff. And this Tech team had 16 turnovers, 4 of them from Padula, 3 of them from Kidd. And that's, you're going to have a lot of turnovers when you play a team that's as long as Florida State is. But Mike Young teams don't turn the ball over as much. They're not as good offensively. They're not moving the ball and they're turning it over more. That's just a bad combination.
Yeah, normally Mike Young teams are very entertaining to watch, even if they lose. I would say even his first team at Tech, which, only went 500, it was still an entertaining team to watch because the ball moves really well. There were some good physical players on that team. Like, Wabisa Beatty wasn't a good scorer, but he was a physical player. He was an ACC
He wanted
player.
to get up in your face and defend you.
Exactly. And Tyrese Radford was the same way. Tech didn't have any trouble getting the ball over the half-court line that year, right? Because they had the ACC athletes to do it. They didn't quite have enough shooters and things like that. They didn't have enough depth or enough size, but they had enough athletes. Now, there are times where they struggle to get the ball past half-court.
Yeah.
I think it's actually a testament to how good a coach Mike Young is when, they can go score 74 points in a game on the road. And I don't actually think, without good coaching, I don't think they would be able to do that. So we'll see if we're having the same conversation on March 9th, because things can change in 2 months. But right now, I think he's got some retooling on his roster that he'll have to do in the offseason. We knew already it was going to happen at the 4 spot anyway, because it's 2 seniors. Exactly. But you've got to replace Couture. I don't know if that guy's on this roster.
And Lincoln and Elijah POTY, you have to convince them to come back.
Right, and I think you need, not only do you need to replace Couture, but you got to decide if the other guards in your program, you got to project in your head, are they going to be good enough next year? Because I think Tech should bring in 2 guards and a 4 in the offseason. And depending on who's still here, would determine the profiles of those players. But I definitely think I would feel more comfortable with another backcourt option because, Couture's gone. And even if you brought in somebody to replace him and he was a good player, then your other question marks are still there. So, he's got some retooling to do in the offseason, I think.
Will, what you got for us?
So I'm looking at conference-only statistics, and this has been 3 games. Virginia Tech is out shooting their opponents from the field, 46.2 to 43.5. Out shooting them from three-point range, 35.6 to 30.2%. Total rebounds are 99 for Tech, 102 for the opponents, so really close. And the problem is, if you guys have said, is turnovers. Virginia Tech has 45 turnovers. Their opponents have 31. That's a big difference.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and leave it there on the men's basketball conversation. Chris is going to go step out. He's got some editorial stuff to take care of.
I got to start writing an article.
There we go. Big stuff coming up there. Will's going to hop back on the set. We're going to talk women's basketball coming up in just a moment. Big win against number 3 NC State. We'll unpack it for you after this. It's episode 340 of the Tech Sideline podcast. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back in, Tech fans. As always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. As our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, helping us to bring you all the great content across all of our platforms. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Bank with First Bank and Trust Company. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. All right, Chris steps off, Will steps on, David Cunningham across the way, Nick Brown behind the scenes producing. Guys, women's basketball just got exciting.
That was fun.
It was fantastic, and it was exciting, but it just took another notch up, and it felt like the good old days of when they were playing in the Final Four. Big win, 13th ranked Hokies take down number 3 NC State in an absolute thriller, David.
That was awesome. Will, you and Chris were there. Chris came up to me before the game. He walked by press row and said that was his first women's basketball game since he was in college.
Yeah, how about that?
I know you obviously have covered the program, and you've been to a lot of women's basketball games, and I've covered them for a long time. That was, and I'm obviously there's an age difference between us. That in my time, that is the most impressive women's basketball crowd I've ever seen at Castle Coliseum.
It's definitely the most impressive crowd since they started charging for tickets back in which I think was the 99-2000 season. It's funny, Tech had some highly attended games in the 98-99 season because they were really good, and that's the year they went to the Sweet 16. And then Jim Weaver, as a good athletic director should do, started charging admission the next year, and that dropped the crowds down to about 2,500 per game, which was actually an increase even over when it was free in prior times. But back to the topic, yes, that was a large crowd. It was a loud crowd, and I wasn't surprised by it because didn't the previous game have something like 6,000?
It was over
fans?
6,000 on New Year's Eve for a
Against Pitt.
2 p.m. matinee against the worst team in the ACC.
Yeah, I didn't go to that one, but I saw the highlights and I thought, holy cow, there's a lot of people there. And at this point, I'm wondering if things keep trending the way they're trending, if the women's team is actually going to outdraw the men's team.
So that was obviously tied for the highest attended game under Kenny Brooks.
Right.
Tied with the 2 NCAA tournament games last year that Tech sold out. This season is on average averaging 5,400 fans a game. That is largest of all time in terms of years. Yeah. Tech has, let me just do a quick calculation real quick. Times, Tech has...
Do you need me to fill some airtime?
Sure, yeah. I was going to calculate. I mean, Tech. So essentially, the record for most fans in a season in Castle is 78,000, and Tech's going to blow that out of the water.
Yeah.
And that just, it's a combination of everything. And I thought,
what year was that 78,000 fans from?
that was 98-99.
98,
That was
when games were free.
when Tech averaged 5,200 fans.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm wrong on this. I think games were free back then.
Sounds about right.
And the most highly attended regular season game in Tech history was the Xavier game that year, which was about 9,700 fans back when capacity was, I believe, listed at 10,052. Since then, they put the pep band in there. They've carved out some seats.
They
press row.
for media.
The wooden seats are no longer.
Right, they got rid of the wooden seats, and I think that reduced capacity as well.
Yeah.
So there were 9,700 fans for that game, and then Tech hosted first 2 rounds in the NCAA that year, and pretty much sold out both games right around the 10,000 mark.
Yeah.
So, but it's been a long time since there were that many fans in for a women's basketball game.
I think it's impressed me, Gio, how much the fans actually like the fan support has surprised me. I expected to walk into Castle Coliseum on New Year's Eve for that Pitt game and there be maybe 2,000 people in the building.
Yeah.
It's like 6,000. Like, this is a good crowd. That's a very good crowd for New Year. Like, and then a sellout against NC State. I'm excited to see what happens over the next couple weeks because the students and the band are not here.
Yeah.
And people always, Georgia Amor was like, I can't even believe, like, we sold it out with the students. Without the students, don't forget the band. The band's very important too. And I thought the band obviously adds to the atmosphere.
They also fill a good 200 seats.
Yeah.
Probably 100 seats.
But that's just crazy impressive. And they got to see a good basketball game. And I think, yes, Virginia Tech trailed for the majority of the game, but I felt like Tech was always kind of like right there, knocking on the door, just waiting for an opportunity. about 8 minutes to go. Tech's down 11. It was kind of like do or die time, and Tech rips off a 12-0 run, 14-2 to end the game. Holds NC State scoreless for almost 8 minutes, which is ridiculous.
And the crowd was a big part of that.
Yeah, and then Elizabeth Kitley's game-winning shot. I mean, just a great day in Castle Coliseum all around.
So let's go ahead and break down that moment a little bit. I just loved the chess match that you got between Kenny Brooks and Wes Moore. Obviously, Wes Moore, 11th year with NC State. He has taken that program back to the heights that they were once at. Kenny Brooks has taken Virginia Tech to heights that they've never, seen before, really, after last season. And you had first of all, NC State, kudos to them. After going on a 12-0 scoring drought on the other side for Virginia Tech, they did get that one bucket, and then they retook the lead there with 2.1 left.
That was a good basket. Yeah.
Oh, heck of a take by Rivers.
Sinai Rivers driving to the lane, and Kenny Brooks mentioned that they wanted to foul because they knew they had a foul to give, but they didn't want to foul if anybody was driving downhill. And she kind of got downhill, turned her hips, went to the rim. And the plan was not to foul. So she scores with 2.1 seconds left. Tech calls timeout. NC State calls timeout.
So then you have this inbound. Obviously, you get to advance the ball in women's hoops, just like the NBA.
Which I think is very cool, by the way.
Yes, I think it's awesome.
Well, you don't win the game if you can't advance it, honestly. Yeah. Unless, Georgia hit a half quarter against Iowa. Things can happen, but it wouldn't have been. It
makes things more difficult to draw up.
For sure. Especially with that limited amount of time. And then they were kind of showing face where they were going to have Georgia inbound it, and you just kind of had the feel that it was going to be a quick inbound right back to her, and she was going to get the shot.
Well, that's what Kenny Brooks admitted that it was going to be.
And she had the hot hand at that point.
Yeah.
And then they show face. Wes Moore calls a timeout, and then they go with the Kitley play. I mean, it was just beautifully drawn up, perfect execution, heck of a pass by Kayla King. All the credit to her, really.
Yeah, that was so Kenny Brooks. Kenny Brooks' press conference is on YouTube. Go for Virginia Tech Athletics or Hokie Sports. Go check it out. It was really funny. He explained the entire thought process of here's what we were going to run, and here was what we changed it to. And afterwards, he goes, "Man, I just gave my entire plays away." But they originally had it set up where Amor was going to inbound it to Kitley, run around real quick, catch it, drive to the rim, or try to pull up and hit a shot. And NC State switched some things. So Tech came out. Tech went to what Georgia Amor called Old Faithful, which is this play that Tech's run a bunch of times, and it's Kayla King inbounding the ball. And I was so surprised that NC State did not have somebody guarding her, inbounding it. Kayla King lobs it to the rim. Elizabeth Kitley coming off of a screen from Georgia Amor. And NC State fans were upset that she was moving. I thought it was, yes, she had kind of her arms crossed a little bit, but I thought it was more of I thought she played it off pretty well. She kind of just slowly moved over and ran into them a little bit. And that's less of a screen and more of just like, I'm just kind of bumping into each other. And I think if you're official on that play, if that's going against Tech and that's NC State scoring that, I think you're looking at that going, that's a pretty good play. And that gave Elizabeth Kitley all the time she needed. Beautiful pass from Kayla King. Catch, put up, shot is good. 0.9 seconds left. NC State misses the half-court heave at the buzzer. Funny enough, last year when Elizabeth Kitley hit the game winner at North Carolina, there was 2.1 seconds remaining. It was Kayla King inbounding to Kitley and Georgia Amor screen. So just funny how things were kind of repeat itself. But I mean, for Virginia Tech to be down 11, to play with that core, the three, and then two freshmen in Karis Baker and Carly Wenzel, and they were crucial.
Huge.
There was a span of 6 possessions in a row where Carly Wenzel had 3 rebounds and Karis Baker had 2.
Yeah.
And they played good defense, and Baker had a block, and I don't think Wenzel did, but Wenzel forced a really good miss. They played good defense down the stretch. Those are 2 freshmen. If you don't get those contributions from them, you don't win the game. And Georgia Amore and Elizabeth Kitley scored all the points in the quarter. They were on a roll, and then everything just kind of set up perfectly. It was the perfect storm for Virginia Tech, and you can't forget the crowd because, as Georgia Amore said, with every rebound, every make, the crowd, the decibel just kind of, it just got louder and louder and louder. It kind of brought the crowd into it because I thought it was a good crowd that was kind of quiet for a while because they didn't have a ton to cheer about. And then you start to make some shots, and it's, oh man, this crowd's into it. NC State calls timeout with like 4.5, 5 minutes to go.
Yeah.
It's a 4-point game. And at that point, it was kind of like, all right, this is anybody's game.
Yeah.
So, regarding the crowd, a couple things. Women's basketball crowds are different than men's basketball crowds. So Chris and I are sitting up in the corner, and there's just a lot more, for example, kids at women's basketball games. Like there were like 6 little boys next to us in the row, and they were really not all that interested in the game for the vast, like 35 out of the 40 minutes. So you had noise and the crowd was pretty decent, but where they really cranked it up was in that last 5 minutes when even a little kid can understand it. It's getting down to the end, and this stuff is important. The noise that a women's basketball crowd makes is a little bit higher pitched and a little bit louder because, getting back to the topic of kids being there, adults will cheer, but they'll restrain themselves. Kids don't restrain themselves. Once they get going, they will scream endlessly. So it's a little bit different. And when Liz Kitley made that shot, it reminded me of, I just looked it up while David was talking. In the 2017-2018 season, do you remember when Virginia Tech, David, were you in school in 2017-2018?
That was my freshman year.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you remember when Virginia Tech beat Duke on the last second bank in?
Yeah.
Not last second.
Yeah,
but it's-
Nikhil Alexander Walker, Chris Clark. Yeah, that
Yeah,
reminded me of.
No, wait a minute. Let me finish my story. So Alexander Walker misses a shot with like 4 seconds left to go, and Chris Clark just catches it and banks it in. And Duke was ranked 5th in the country, by the way. The instantaneous noise that when that shot went in, it was just like when Liz's shot went in, because my reaction was I was expecting the old throw it in short, jack up the off balance 3-pointer. And instead, you got a lob right underneath the basket. And if there'd been a camera on me, you would have seen my jaw drop as that ball was flying through the air. So you're in disbelief. You're like, what am I looking at? Then she catches it and banks it in, and the crowd goes from 0 to 11 instantaneously.
Immediate,
Yeah. So really cool.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I mean, there have been a lot of really good moments, like game winners in Castle Coliseum. I was talking with Carter Hill on TSL yesterday, talking about this game. And I mean, I think like some of the most recent men's memories, Tyrese Radford had shot against 2 or 3 overtimes against Carolina. MJ Collins hit one against Duke last year to win it.
Mm-hmm. Seth Allen in the lane against Virginia.
Oh my God. Yeah. There have been a bunch of, Seth Allen, a couple of them obviously against Duke. There have been some really good ones. This is like the first big one for the women. And it's going to, I mean, in front of a sold out crowd, first ever in a regular season game. That is special. And yeah, I mean, I was mostly just amazed that like Kenny Brooks is a wizard when it comes to drawing up a play at the end of the game.
Out of bounds plays.
Game-winning out of bounds plays.
Drawing up an out of bounds play at the end of the game. I mean, it all comes down to what you can do on your clipboard and what the players can execute. And one of the things that I wrote about yesterday was this was a program in 2020 to 2021. That season, that was the COVID season. Tech only played about 25 games. Tech had 5 games where it led by more than 10 points and ended up blowing the lead and losing. Since then, that's only happened one time. In the 3 years since, that was the LSU game in the Final Four. Tech does not...
Boo.
And Tech, the talent level and the confidence and the culture, everything has gotten so good that it's gotten to the point where Tech is not... People are not making runs at Tech anymore. People are not coming... When Tech's up 15, people aren't coming back because Tech has the players and the coaches like Tech has the ability to overcome that now. Kenny Brooks sat in this chair on the podcast over the summer and kind of talked about it a little bit, about how in those early years, they just didn't have the players. They've got the players. They've got 2 All-Americans, and that makes it easy, sure. And Kayla King had a beautiful pass, and she'll always be kind of that third, and she'll always be in some ways underrated. But she Virginia Tech is not Virginia Tech, this team as we know it, without Kayla King's contributions. But the fact that you look back 5-6 years ago, Tech is not able to execute that play because Tech does not have the talent, because they don't have somebody like Kayla King who can make that pass. They don't have somebody like Elizabeth Kitley who can make that shot. It just doesn't happen.
So it's not just talent, it's attitude, and Liz has had a couple of game-winning shots, but Georgia's the one, to me, that puts the team on her back.
Yeah.
And she did that. Georgia wasn't having a great shooting game.
She was 1 of 8 in the first half.
Right.
She had 3 points in the first half.
Yeah,
right?
and then picked it up quite a few notches in the second half. So the other thing is that you talk about attendance and interest in the program, and part of the interest in the program is not just the high level that they're performing at, but the personalities of the players. Everybody likes Kenny Brooks, the coach. People love Liz Kitley and Georgia Amor. They are special personalities. And he gets back to Georgia airballs a 3, and they cut the camera to her, and she's laughing about it. And I know that might tick some fans off, but it's Georgia Amor who's like, I can't believe I did that.
And a lot of fans are like, oh man, it's okay.
And she's not. She's
like that's just like how much people love her.
And she's not rattled by it, and she's going to come back from it, and she did.
Yeah.
So I would tell Tech fans. Clearly, a lot of them have been coming to the games. If you haven't been coming to the games, come to the games, because this is a special moment in time for this program. We hope there will be collections of players like this in the future, and that they'll achieve at a high level in the future. But they're doing it right now, so go see them, because if you don't, you'll be sorry that you didn't.
Yeah.
Think about how you talk about legends in the past, like the way that we talk about Vic and the way that we talk about Tyrod Taylor and D'Angelo Hall and players like that's this right now. And that is this.
So here's a guy that people would kill to see play in Castle Coliseum again. Random example, Deron Washington.
Oh my God, yeah.
My
God.
And Deron was an example of. So part of what happened in the Seth Greenberg era was he had the group of he had Zabian Dowdell, Coleman Collins, and Jamon Gordon. And Deron came in 1 year after them. So Deron was here for a year after.
And don't forget AD Visayo.
Sure, AD. But AD was a mellow dude. He was fun to watch, but he was mellow. But when Deron Washington left the building, the likability of Seth's teams went down. Everybody respects the ability of Jeff Allen and Malcolm Delaney.
When his mom left the building, because his mom was always on
part
television.
Of the deal, man.
Yeah, I know.
So, but it just even in Seth's, that next group of players for Seth is their group that, in addition to Seth's own shortcomings, wound up in Seth getting fired. But I remember those 4 years with those 4 guys, that core team that Seth had. They just weren't likable. And I'm not bad mouthing the guys.
You mean the guys after Washington?
After
Yeah.
Jamon Gordon had such a personality, and Coleman Collins had his story, and Deron Washington had such a personality. And that's not how Jeff Allen and Malcolm Delaney and those guys were wired.
Yeah.
That's not to say they were unlikable. I'm just saying you didn't warm up to them like you did. So to bring the conversation back around, everybody loves Liz in Georgia. So get out there and see them play.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Kenny Brooks' show, I believe they're recording tonight on Tuesday. But if you listen, they do. Evan Hughes hosts it, and it's at the
University Club.
University Club. Thank you, in Lane Stadium. And there's. The crowds have really impressed me. People love this, and Evan Hughes, or I guess Kenny Brooks has been saying it in their program. If Carly Wenzel was going to have a podcast, they'd call it "Everyone Loves Carly." Kind of like everyone loves Chris. I think you can see it after games how much people appreciate them, and it's not just kids. Elizabeth, I took a picture of Elizabeth Kitley about 50 minutes after the game. And she stayed probably for about 70 minutes after the game, signing autographs. And some of them are for kids, but some of them are for like adults who have been Virginia Tech fans their entire lives. And people just absolutely love her. People love Georgia. And it's awesome to see because between the little kids, like they're inspiring the next generation right in front of their eyes. And I compare it to when I was in Charlotte for the Iowa game, and you see Caitlin Clark get all this media attention, rightfully so. She's the best player in the country, and she's got all these little girls and sometimes little boys holding up, wearing Caitlin Clark jerseys and holding up signs, and or just ordinary fans, my age, and you're starting to see that here. And it's not just for one player, it's for the team. And I think it's really, really unique because that's something that, at least in my time, that's never happened. I think when that 2018-2019 men's basketball team made that run, there was something special about it, and you could feel how much the fans loved that team.
Yeah.
But this is not just a one-time thing for this women's basketball team. I mean, obviously, it helps that they had so much success last year, but like, they are beloved, and you just can't really replicate that. And as a result, I mentioned earlier, I'm very curious to see what happens when Tech hosts Carolina and Duke and UVA here when the students are back. The students get back next week. Virginia Tech's gonna play a lot of home games. If Tech can sell out Castle Coliseum for a handful of more games, not just a top 5 game against NC State, that Castle Coliseum can turn into a fortress. It already is a pretty good home court advantage, but there are so many things heading in the right direction with this program. We haven't even talked about how big of a win it is. I mean, like, the magnitude of the win, 3rd ever win against a top 5 team.
Yeah.
And to do it in that fashion.
And you assert your dominance against NC State a little bit there with 3 consecutive wins over the Wolfpack as well, which is huge because they had a little bit of a lull last season, but it feels like NC State is back. I mean, I will remind everybody, they are the only team in the country that hold 2 wins over top 3 teams. They took down a top 3 UConn team and a top 3 Colorado team. I want to ask you guys this. Does Kitley kind of pull ahead in a race here a little bit? Now she had a 27-12 game. She had her quote-unquote Heisman moment of the season. Last year, it felt like she really stapled ACC Player of the Year after that buzzer beater against UNC. Does she have a three-peat in her after a game like this?
I mean, she's definitely the front runner.
Yeah.
And she was never not.
Who's out there to compete with her? Like I know Notre Dame, but yeah, Notre Dame's got a really good freshman. Right?
Yeah, Hannah Hidalgo, who's won like ACC Player of the Week a handful of times. Tanaya Latson and at Florida State, and Timpson. I'm forgetting her first name at Florida State. Deja Kelly and Alyssa Usby at North Carolina. Sanaya Rivers at NC State. I mean,
Deja Fair's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, Deja Fair. You had to bring up Syracuse.
Had to.
There are a bunch of really good players in the conference, but I think what goes overlooked is that Elizabeth Kitley can just casually have a 27-12 double night in and night out. It is utterly ridiculous.
It's like the football team winning 10 games year after year under Frank Beamer. You expect it, and you get kind of bored's a negative word, but you expect it.
She's playing better basketball too. I know she had a bunch of turnovers against Wake Forest, but she's scoring the ball better. She's rebounding the ball better. Georgia Amor is playing better too. Georgia Amor is averaging 7.5 assists per game.
Crazy.
After averaging 4 last year.
Wow, and I did not know
and her
that.
scoring's gone up. She already has over 100 assists. Her first year here, she only had 115 an entire year. Like, Georgia Amor isn't playing at an incredible level, but everybody just kind of takes it for granted. And I think that's kind of the crazy thing about it. Yeah, I think and Elizabeth Kitley would have joined an elite company if she won a 3rd straight ACC Player of the Year.
It's only happened once or twice?
2 or 3 times. I think twice on the men's side, twice on the women's side. I'm trying to think of there's a
There's a
list
player
I
at
have.
Duke that did it on the women's side.
Yeah.
Correct, yeah.
one of the guys who did on the men's side is Ralph Sampson. Like elite company we're talking about. But yeah, I think she kind of pulls away. But this team has a lot of momentum right now, and I'm very curious to see. They got a good Miami team in Castle on Thursday. Then they go to Florida State, a Florida State team who gave NC State a run for its money. And you talk about how good of a team NC State is. NC State was out without center River Baldwin, which I feel like kind of hurt Tech. Like,
yes, because they played very fast transition basketball with their small ball. Yeah.
And if River Baldwin plays for Tech, Tech probably uses more of its size. But as a result, Tech is essentially playing a 4-guard lineup as well. Tech is matching that because you don't want, like in past games, Kenny Brooks has played Clara Strack and Elizabeth Kitley together.
Right.
He's not going to play both of them together when NC State's tallest player is 6'3".
What'd Clara get? 3 minutes?
She didn't.
Not much.
90 seconds.
90 seconds.
And that was just to take Kitley out of the game and give her a breather. But no, this is a big win. I referred to this as a midterm exam for Virginia Tech because Tech was okay in those first 2 big tests. Iowa and better against Iowa, okay against LSU. But this is a completely different team now, and to be able to advance to 3-0 in the ACC, get your third ever top 5 win in program history. In front of that crowd, that is going to, as Kenny Brooks said, feed that crowd. That crowd's going to want to come back. And you've got all this momentum in ACC play now. You proved to yourself, not that Tech ever doubted itself, but you proved to yourself that you could come from behind and win against a really good team. That is a top 5, top 10 NC State team.
Yeah.
And I think... I was talking to my friend Ethan McDowell, who covers NC State for On 3. We were sitting next to each other covering the game. We both agreed that might be part 1 of a 3-part series.
That'd be epic.
That ends in the ACC championship game this year. These are the two of the best teams, and the fact that Virginia Tech was able to close out the game the way it did, so much confidence going forward. And long season, a lot of basketball left to be played. But man, they are playing. Like, they did not even necessarily play their best basketball, but they were able to come from behind and grind out the win. Like, that says a lot about who they are.
All right, so let's do some math here. I was just looking at it. Virginia Tech was 3-3 in the ACC last year. They finished 14-4, which means they went
11-1.
11-1. How many games did they win in the ACC? 3 or 4? ACC tournament.
3.
3. So
they ended the season on a 15-game winning streak.
So that was a 14-1 in the ACC from the time they were 3-3. They're 3-0 this year. They won 17 out of their last 18 ACC games. I will warn Tech fans, they aren't going to win them all. I know that's your expectation now, but that's 17 of 18 in a very good conference.
Yeah, no doubt. I want to talk postseason play just a little bit here. So this vaulted the Hokies to number 11 in the country. Was a little surprised they didn't crack into the top 10, but they did get up to number 11.
What I would say about that is everybody else ahead of Virginia Tech has 1 or no losses.
Right.
And Tech is the highest 2-loss team.
Do you know where Tech is in the net, though? That's really the important thing.
Nick's going to look.
Nick's going to look that up for us. NC State fell from 3 to 6. We have the earliest, the most up-to-date bracketology right here. Virginia Tech hosting a region as a 4 seed. In that, there's Utah, Chattanooga, and James Madison. So the Hokies would match up against JMU in round 1. Boy, does the NCAA know what they're doing.
JMU round 1, and then Sean Poppy.
And then Sean Poppy round 2.
Yeah, so Kenny Brooks' former school, and then his
yes.
Yeah.
So, well, last year you had it with the Sean Poppy matchup, and you're like, man, they know exactly what they're doing. If they match him up against JMU, it's just funny.
15th in the net. NC State is 10.
So Tech's 15th in the net.
Yeah.
NC
State's 10.
The team to keep out for. I know we are just casually cheering for this, but keep an eye on Vanderbilt.
Yeah,
Jake Lyman.
Jake Lyman.
Yeah, Vanderbilt's 16-1, man, and Vandy's in that same regional 2 as an 8 seed. Iowa's the number 1 seed, and that's from Charlie Cream of ESPN. Yeah, I think that's a good spot for Tech right now. Again, long season to go. Remember, this Virginia Tech team was like a 3 or 4, probably like a 2 or 3 seed until it won the NCAA or ACC tournament last year and beat Louisville. And then it vaulted up to a 1 seed, and everybody was like, "Oh, wow!" So there's a lot of basketball to be played. Tech's in a good spot.
No doubt. Miami on Thursday, number 21, Florida State on the road after that, and then you're at Duke next Thursday. So a lot of basketball coming up. You got Thursday, Sunday, Thursday, just like that. Women's is in full swing. Your final thoughts on women's hoops before we let everyone go, guys?
Well,
I don't really have any final thoughts.
He's just excited.
Well, yeah, I personally have not attended very many men's or women's games so far this year. But it's that time of year where all of the football stuff's over, all the Christmas stuff is over, and it's time to start watching some basketball games.
this is a fun team to cover. I will not be in Tallahassee because the men are at home on Saturday against Miami. But I will be in Durham next week for the women.
See you there.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road, as they say. I mean, this is like kind of do or die time. This is Virginia Tech has the advantage. It's Tech's 3-0 in the ACC, and that's Wes Moore said it after the game. He's like, there's no way that the ACC champion is undefeated. It's too good of a league. You're going to have scratches and some battle scars when you get out of conference play, but you want to be playing your best basketball come the ACC tournament come March. I think Virginia.
That's what Tech did last year.
I think Virginia Tech winning 15 is an anomaly. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Yeah. But Virginia Tech is in a good spot, and I'm curious to see how Carly Wenzel and Karis Baker continue to get more playing time, because they were crucial in Virginia Tech's win. If Tech can continue to figure out that 4 through 7, 8 in terms of the rotation, Tech's going to be in a really good spot.
Final wrap up here. What's coming up on TSL.com this week?
That's your managing editor over there.
Yeah, Chris is working on. Chris is working on some. I don't know what Chris is working on actually.
He said it's a big article. It's top secret.
I don't remember.
I can't remember.
think it's a football thing.
I've looked at the editorial schedule.
Yeah.
I can't recall.
I'm writing,
but it's huge. It's enormous.
It's very big.
I'm writing a men's basketball preview for Clemson. I'll have a Miami preview for the women tomorrow morning. Yeah, a lot of basketball going on. Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. Yeah. Got lots of good stuff, and it's kind of nice because Tech's finally back at home again. Mm-hmm. Like Tech had a week or two where felt like I was driving to Winston-Salem every day. So,
well, that's because there were back-to-back games in Winston-Salem. Thanks so much to our sponsors, the Hokie Way and First Bank and Trust Company, as well as Triumph NIL. For Chris Coleman, for Will Stewart, for David Cunningham, for Nick Brown, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long. Thanks for tuning in to episode 340 of the Tech Sideline podcast. We'll see you next week.